Dear learners of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, today we shall be talking about your course management process, in which we will deal with block 4 direction, where we will talk about centralization and decentralization and the various factors which are influencing centralization and decentralization. These factors can be internal to a company or they can be external to the organization. First, let us brief up from what we have continued in the previous session for today. What is the meaning of centralization and decentralization? Basically, in a company, what happens is you will have something called as a management pyramid, where you will have top management, middle level management and lower level management. Top management usually undertakes activities which are related only to thinking, which is called as planning. Middle level management is basically a link between the top and the lower level managers. Whereas managers who are there at the lower levels, they are doing the activities related to doing function, that is they execute whatever is being planned by the top management. So when you have this pyramid of management in a company, in case the activities which are related to planning and decision making, authority and power is actually concentrated only to a particular person or group of people, then it is called as a centralized setup. For example, top management in a company, you could have board of directors. All the decisions which are related to the company are taken only by the board of directors. Then you call it as a centralized setup, because planning function, decision making, authority to make those decisions are all being upheld by the top management, which is board of directors only. They have not handed over this activity to the lower level managers. Then such a setup will be called as a centralized setup of management as such. In centralized organizations, what happens is most of the times, wherever is the head office, whoever are the heads in that particular office, they will be taking most of the decisions which are communicated down the line. That means whoever are the lower and the middle level managers, to them all these decisions get communicated. Opposite to this, in contrast, you have decentralized setup, which is empowering teams and groups which are working at the lower levels, so that they also have the authority to make decisions. They are communicating from bottom to top, so that whatever are the decisions being taken at the lower levels, they get communicated back to the top management as such. It is not that all decisions are actually given away. Decisions which are long term, strategic, which are of utmost importance to the company, they are kept by the top management only. But majority of the other decisions may be handed over to the lower level managers. If such a setup is there in a company, then it will be called as a decentralized setup. This is a conceptual understanding of what is a centralized organization and a decentralized organization. Now, how do companies make a decision or a choice whether they should be going for a centralized setup or a decentralized setup? Usually what happens, there are many factors which have an impact on such decisions which are there, which can be broken down into factors within the company and factors which are related to the external environment, that is outside the company. But first, let us discuss the general factors which are there. Then we come to the specific internal and external factors which can be taking decision related to choice of centralization or decentralization. The first key factor which is there is related to strategy and vision. Now, in management literature, we find these two terms, vision and mission. Vision basically is what is it that the company wants to do down the line. Long-term plan of the company. That long-term can be ranging for 15 years, 20 years. So, where is it that the company wants to see itself down the line is what is the vision of the company. For example, a pizza making company can say we want to be a #1 pizza making company in the world. A logistic company can say that they want to be the fastest delivery company in the world. So that is their long-term vision, where they are talking about who are they and what do they want to do in the long term in future. That is vision of the company. That particular vision is broken down into smaller attainable goals which are time bound, which is called as mission. So if you want to become a #1 pizza maker in the world, or if you want to be the fastest delivery company in the world, what should you be doing? So those things broken down into smaller accomplishable goals, they are called as your mission. Now, why are we talking about mission and vision in relation to centralization and decentralization? if the strategy and the vision of the company is that they want to be, they want to have a clear and stable strategies which are related to their environment, and in such a case then the organization can have a centralized setup, that is only top management is taking all the decision. On the other hand, if the company is interested in innovation, they want to motivate the lower level employees, they want them to take decisions which are related to unpredictable contexts which are there, or they want change to be managed in a very flexible way at the lower levels. If that is the strategy and vision of the company, then it is always better that the company decentralizes, so that you give the initiative to the lower level managers who are there in the organization. Many companies of the world, especially MNCs today, talk about Google or you talk about Adobe, all these firms have got a very dynamic and initiative kind of a culture where they give away the decision making authority to the lower levels in the management, so that that strategy and vision of the company can be attained very easily. So strategy and vision is one thing which will decide whether you have to centralize or decentralize. Second thing is size and complexity. The extent to what is the structure in the company. For example, if the company is following a very tall structure of hierarchy, so many hierarchical positions are there. You have managers and deputy managers, assistant managers, and below them you have so many people who are working. Then at every hierarchical level which is there, decisions have to be taken. Then that structure will be very tall structure which is there in the company. Similarly, if you have more number of people, interdependencies are many in the organization, then in such a situation it is always better that the company goes for a decentralized setup which will be there. Otherwise, decisions will be delayed at every level which you will have to take. In case the authority is decentralized, each level will take their own decisions which will be there. So size and complexity. Larger the organizations, better it is that they decentralize. Smaller companies will have lesser number of people, decisions can be taken instantly by few people who are there at the top management. So for such small companies which are there, they can easily take centralized decision making or centralized setup of management which is there. For example, startups, if there is a new company which has started, then for such startups they usually follow a centralized setup. But for companies like you have Infosys or Wipro or Hindustan Unilever, or you have companies like HUL, BHEL and all, then it is always better that such companies go ahead and follow a decentralized setup, because they are very big companies and complexities are there at different levels and decisions have to be taken at different levels. So for such big organizations where complexities are many, then decentralized setup will work. Whereas for a startup company and smaller companies, lesser number of employees, less complexities are there, then they can go for a centralized setup which will be there. That's the second key factor which will impact. The third key factor is what type of a culture is followed in the company, value system which is followed in the company. See, some of the companies, they have something called as a conformity focused approach. That means whatever is being said by the leader or the top management, that flows down the hierarchy and everybody has to follow that. So conformity to rules, conformity to norms which are framed by the leader of the company or the top management of the company. If such a situation is there, then it is always better to go for a central setup, centralized organization, because conformity focused approach is there in the company. Whereas organizations which are more flexible, which have got collaborative approach of working, autonomy is given to lower levels of managers to take decisions, flexibility is given to workers to complete the work the way they have to work, keeping in mind efficiency as such. So if such an organization is there where you are respecting autonomy, collaboration of the employee, then it is good that the company follows a decentralized setup. So the culture and the value system of the company plays a role in deciding whether to go for decentralized or centralized setup. Similarly, you have a key factor which is called as technology and systems. In case the company is using a centralized setup where the data is being centralized, planning is being done at the central level, monitoring, reducing risk and uncertainty because of use of data, then it is better that the company goes for a central setup. Whereas a decentralized approach can be followed in companies which have diverse data, diverse approach to using that particular data. Different departments have got their own data systems, their own technology management softwares, their own systems of work. Then in such a situation, because things are streamlined at every departmental level, it is always better that they go for a decentralized setup as such. So technology, systems, data management also plays a role in deciding whether to go for a central or a decentralized setup. Very crucial key factor is related to people and skills. A company, even if they want to give away decision making, but if they don't have people who are efficient, skillful, who understand the work, then also top management cannot give away, because you don't have such people in the company. So therefore, presence of people at the lower levels of management who can take appropriate decisions, who are skillful, who are efficient, then it is always better that the company goes for a decentralized setup, because you know that there are people at the lower levels who can easily handle the task, take the decision, and who are skillful. So easily top management can hand over the activity. But if the top management is not aware about the skills of the people, or people are not skillful or efficient, or people are still learning, or managers are in the early stage of their career, then in such cases it is always better that the company takes time to decentralize and follows a centralized setup for some time, till the time people get acquainted, trained and used to the kind of a work that is there in the company. So that way, these are some of the key factors which the company has to keep in mind. Nevertheless, there are internal and external factors also, which we will discuss a little later. Now, when we talk about, the concept of whether to go for centralized or decentralized, in management literature, there is an author called Mervyn Cohen. He has pointed out, depending upon physical facilities, that is plant, personnel and equipment, and authority. These two factors he took into consideration. Factor number one, facilities. Under facilities, he talks about plant. Plant means your manufacturing process, a number of machines that you have, technology systems that you have, all this put together is your plant. And people. What kind of a people do you have in the company? Equipment do you have in the company? So plant, personal, equipment he calls as facilities, that is one. Second factor that he takes is decision, that is authority to make decision. So considering these two concepts, that is physical facilities and authority to make decision, he talks about characteristics of a company and he put it in the form of a matrix. And he calls it as 4 combinations which can be there of companies based on these two factors, whether to go for a centralized or a decentralized setup. Now, in case the companies have got plant, personal equipment and facilities which are there, and they are following a central setup, which means that all these facilities, products will be concentrated in one building or in several other buildings which may be there in a localized area. Same building will have all these things, or 2-3 buildings which are situated in the same area may be having all these facilities which can be there. So you call it as a centralized or a concentrated setup when you talk about the facilities. Similarly, high degree of centralization and concentration will be there, or retention of decision making will be there in the upper levels of management, who are where subordinates are highly dependent on the upper levels of management. So that way you will have a concentrated setup. A decentralized setup you can have based on these facilities, where the products, the services, the business functions which are there, they may be scattered in many places. For example, you can have multi-plant operations. Each unit can be treated as a separate entity, and you can have autonomous functioning of that particular unit. As you can take example of a bank, for example State Bank of India. You have so many branches which are there of State Bank of India, and then you would have each one of that branch which is functioning as a complete autonomous unit, and the branch manager has got powers to take decisions related to utilization of deposits and loans, advances being given away to customers in that particular branch which can be there. So that is by itself a autonomous, self-sustaining single unit which can be functioning. So you can have a decentralized setup there. High degree of delegation and dispersion of decision making will be there, and lower levels of management are working independently as profit centers, responsibility centers in such a situation. So when you talk about two concepts of physical facilities and autonomy or authority to make decisions, then you can depending on combination of these two factors, you can go for a centralized or a decentralized setup which can be there. Now coming specifically to the internal and the external factors which are affecting centralization and decentralization, let us talk about the factors which are firstly outside the company, because that talks about the broader environment which is affecting the decision of centralization. First is environment itself. Environment where you have consumers, you have suppliers, you have competitors, government is there. When all these actors or factors which are there in the external environment are there, if the consumers and suppliers are dispersed, competition is not intense, and the market is providing wide area for the company to penetrate, add products and all, then the company can go for decentralization in such a situation, because you have customers who are spread across, and you have so many competitors who are there in the market, wide area of operation you have in your company, so many product lines you have in the company. Then if the environment is such where you have so much of dynamism, then it is better that the company goes for decentralized setup. So external environment of the organization. Second is regulation of the government. If the government is laying down strict rules, procedures and policies for the business firms, then management cannot take the risk of delegating decision making to the lower levels of the authority, because they may have the fear of being penalized if the lower level managers don't obey the rules or observe the procedures which are there. So the tendency to decentralize will be low in such situations where government rules, regulations are very strict. For example, now government today is talking about eco labeling. Government is talking about how do you go about manufacturing biodegradable products. So more of the companies, we are talking about climate change and lesser carbon emissions. So most companies are concentrating on all these aspects which are related to biodegradable productions and biodegradable packaging. So if that function is delegated to the lower levels management, then there is always a fear whether they are following the government regulations or not. So therefore it becomes essential in such companies that they go for a centralized setup as such. So if the company or the sector to which the company belongs, if that particular sector is highly regulated by the government, say banking sector, insurance sector, they are all regulated by the government. So in such situations where you have high regulation by the government, it is always better that the company goes for a centralized setup as such. Then what are the features of the market? In what way the market operates? If the market is having homogeneous products which are produced by all the firms, then it is better to decentralize. Say all companies who are there in the market are producing same kind of a product, so there is not much which you can do in relation to decision. So when all the companies are producing homogeneous products, then no innovation can be done there. So in such a situation, all decisions will be routine as such. So you can easily decentralize your company in case the market has got homogeneous products, in case the power to make decisions can be decentralized to lower level manager. Similarly, bargaining with trade unions. Nowadays, the relevance and role of trade union has come down, but otherwise trade unions agreed to bargain with lower level managers for their rights. Decision making power can be decentralized. But if the trade unions want interference or intervention only of the top management, then in such cases where trade unions are very strong and they cannot negotiate with the lower level managers, then it is always better that the company goes for a centralized setup as such. These are factors which are external to the company, outside the company, because it is related to the broader environment, the environment as such, the regulation by the government, the market structure which is there, and the trade power of the trade unions. Factors external to the company. Likewise, you also have factors which are within the company, internal factors which are affecting decentralization, under which the first one is the size of the company. If the size of the company keeps on increasing, it becomes very difficult for the top management to control everybody, take decisions all the time. So decision making will be very time consuming in such situations where you have thousands of employees working in your company. So in such organizations, it is better that you give away the authority, decision making power to each one of the units. Functions which are there, marketing function, they can take their own decision, finance department, they can take their own decisions, you can have R&D who takes their decisions. So like that, you can have, whenever the size of the firm keeps increasing, the decision making can be delegated to the functional managers and the lower level managers. Various functions in the company give away the power to make decisions to specific functions which are there, which also increases efficiency because top management can concentrate on strategic matters and routine matters can be handed over to the lower level manager. That is one internal factor because it depends upon the size and the size of the company, how big the company is, how many functions you have, how many employees you have, how many tasks or activities that you take up. Based on that you can determine. That is one. Second thing is cost in the organization. Decisions which may be requiring huge amount of money, for example buying a land, plant or machine, are usually taken by the top executives in the organization, whereas decisions which can be related to routine budgets, which can be their purchase of raw material, payment of salaries and wages to employees, expenses which are incurred for maintenance, repairs of machines, etc., which are not too large, where not huge amount of funds are necessary, then they can be handed over to the lower level managers, where firms want to maintain very strict cost control measures in the activity. Then the decentralization will be less because the top management is more concerned about, sometimes it so happens that in big companies also top management end up doing something called as micromanagement, where for every single penny which is being spent they would interfere. So such organizations will have lot of delay in decisions and they will be very meticulously working for every single rupee that is being spent in the company. But it is more advisable that companies where huge amount of funds are spent on some decisions, then the company can have a centralized setup, whereas where you have a financial outlay, routine decisions which are being taken, every department has got their own budget to spend, company has estimated the expenses of every department and they have restrictions to do their spending. In such a situation it's better to decentralize as such. So cost matters which are related to cost and cost control or management of finances and fund, that also will determine whether to what extent you can go for centralization or decentralization. Then the philosophy of the management. What is the management desirous of centralizing or is the management desirous of decentralizing? See, some of the managers will prefer to retain power with them, whereas some of the managers believe in collaborative work. They want participation even from their employees. So those managers who want decisions to be taken at lower levels, then naturally they will decentralize the decision making power as such in the organization. So philosophy of the supervisors, the top management also determines whether you go for a central or a decentralized setup. Then the history of the company. Whichever is the enterprise, in the past what they have been doing, whether they have been following a central setup or a decentralized setup, that will naturally have an effect on what they will do currently. No doubt it can always change, but otherwise it usually, past precedents are followed in future also, and to change the past precedents it takes a little time. So unless and until a strong desire is there by the management to take lower level management into decision making, otherwise they will keep on following what has been happening in the past as such. So history of the enterprise also plays a very important role. Then what kind of functional areas do you have? Like, do you have finance as a separate department, marketing as a separate department, HR as a separate department, research and development as a separate department, production as a separate department, sales as a separate department? The number of departments and the functional areas, if there are too many in a company, then a centralized setup will not work for such organizations. You will have to decentralize authority and give away decision making to all these units which are there in the organization. So functional areas which are there. Similarly, ability of the subordinates. Are the subordinates inspiring? Can they take innovative decisions? Do they have initiative to take those decisions? So what is the ability that these subordinates have? That also will determine whether they can go for a centralized or a decentralized setup. Then the growth rate of the company. At what rate is the company growing? See, top managers of a growing enterprise, an enterprise which is growing in terms of finances, that is profits, also physical parameters like more number of offices, more number of plant, machinery, equipment, technology, investment and all, they spend more time on strategic matters of the company. So they tend to decentralize. decentralized. So in case the enterprise is a growing enterprise, then it is always better that you go for a decentralized setup. Whereas in case the company is a company which is having a stable growth, not a super growth company, and not a company which is having dynamism which is there, then they can adopt a centralized setup as such. So growth rate also has got an impact. Then what kind of a communication system is followed in the company? That also is very essential. Usually, communication systems which are there in the organizations, the company can go for a top-down approach. They can go for a communication system where you can have around star communication, like around the clock, communication flows in a scalar chain. You don't have actually top-down hierarchy which is being followed, but communication actually happens across the company. So in such situations, decentralization always works as such. Control system also. How is control mechanism planned in an organization? Are actual performances of employees measured against standards? If such a situation is there, then performance appraisal will be very easy and you are holding employees accountable for the work. Then in such situations, you can easily decentralize the organization. These are some of the external and internal factors which have an impact. There are a lot of other management thinkers who have also listed some of the factors which affect the degree of decentralization. Like you have Ernest Dale. Ernest Dale is one management thinker who has written vast literature related to management and organization theory, where he talks about decentralization depending upon four things. One is number of decisions. How many decisions are being taken? Is top management taking more decisions or few decisions? So based on that number of decisions, you decentralize or centralize. Then importance. Are they taking routine decisions or important decisions? What is the relevance of that decision to the company? That is the second one. Third, impact of those decisions. What impact that decision is having on the entire company at present and in future? Whatever decisions are being taken, that may have repercussions for the company currently as well as in future. So impact of those decisions. Then what are the degrees of checks which are required? How many number of times do you have to check whether the employee is proceeding in the right direction or not? That also has got. So Ernest Dale talks about these factors: number of decisions, importance of decisions, impact that the decision has got, and the degree of checks which are required when you talk about centralization and decentralization, right? So in this particular session, we have spoken about what is the concept of centralization, the concept of decentralization, what are the key factors which affect centralization, decentralization, what are the internal and external factors which impact decentralization decisions, and the points which are given by Ernest Dale related to decentralization. So to sum up, basically centralization is a process in which activities which are involved related to planning and decision making are concentrated at top management or to a specific leader or to a specific location. Whereas in case you have delegation of authority, decision making power being handed over to the lower level people in the company, then you would call it as a decentralized setup which will be there, which is empowering all the teams, all the departments, all the lower level managers who are there. And several factors will be there which have the which influence the choice of this decision to centralize or not to centralize. You have the strategy of the company, the vision of the company, the size, the complexities which are there, culture, value system, technology, systems, whether people are efficient or not efficient, what kind of a skill set do they have. All those factors will have an impact, which are key factors. Similarly, internal and external factors also have an impact, like the environment in which you are, regulations by the government, what kind of a market is existing, whether trade unions have bargaining power and they are powerful or not, some external factors. Similarly, internal factors related to size of the company, how much of a cost is involved in taking that particular decision, what is the philosophy of the management, what is the history of the company, how many functional areas do you have, are your subordinates able, skillful or not, whether the company has got what kind of a growth rate, whether it is a growing company, super growth company, stable company, what kind of control communication systems you have. All those will be the internal factors which are affecting the degree of decentralization. And to conclude, Ernest Dale's choices related to the factors impacting degree of decision, whether number of decisions, how many they are, what kind of impact they have got, whether they are important or not, and what kind of checks, degrees of checks which are being put on those decisions, they also determine the degree of decentralization. Nowadays, because modern organizations are high growth organizations which are engaged in a very dynamic environment, it is always better that these companies go for a decentralized setup of decision making and management. Thank you so much.